He was just a boy who aged out of the system with nothing but a rusty tractor key and a name. But what he unlocked with them wasn't a machine. It was a legacy of sacrifice, a fight for a home he never knew he had, and a second chance he never thought he deserved. If you've ever felt like you started with nothing, or that the world had already counted you out, then stick around. This story is for you. And if it resonates, maybe consider subscribing, because we're building a community here for people who know what it means to fight for a place to belong. The day I turned 18 was the day I ceased to exist, at least according to the state of Oregon. For 10 years, I had been a file in a cabinet, a case number, a line item in a budget. Leo Vance, ward of the state. And then, with the stroke of a pen on a discharge form, I was just Leo. No last name that felt like my own, no home, no future that wasn't a terrifying blank page. Mrs. Gable, the director of the group home, had a face permanently fixed in a state of mild disappointment. She'd seen hundreds of kids like me come and go. We were inventory. She handed me a thin manila envelope. Inside was my birth certificate, my social security card, and $200 in cash. The state's parting gift, a severance package for a childhood they'd managed. "That's it," she said, her voice as crisp and impersonal as the form she'd just signed. "You're officially an adult now, Leo. Good luck." I stood there in the linoleum-floored hallway, the smell of industrial cleaner and overcooked broccoli clinging to the air, a smell I had breathed for 3,952 days. I thought there would be something more, a handshake, a word of advice, a flicker of something that wasn't administrative duty in her eyes. There wasn't. "Is there anything else?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I felt small, like I was shrinking back into the 14-year-old kid who first walked through these doors, terrified and alone. She sighed, a little puff of impatience. "Oh, right. This was left for you, years ago. We were instructed to give it to you on your 18th birthday." She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a small gray object and a folded, yellowed piece of paper. She dropped them into my hand. The object was heavy, cold, a single old-fashioned key, its head a simple oval, its shaft thick with a patina of rust and time. The paper was a note, handwritten in a shaky but elegant script. It just had a name and a town, Eleanor Vance, Oak Haven, Oregon, my grandmother. The name was a ghost, a myth I'd been told about once or twice. The woman who'd given me up when I was a toddler. The woman who, according to the thin file I'd once glimpsed, was listed as unfit. I'd spent my whole life building a fortress of resentment around that name. It was easier to believe she hadn't wanted me than to live with the gaping question of why. "It's a tractor key," Mrs. Gable said, a hint of something unreadable in her tone. Maybe pity. Maybe just curiosity. That's what the note that came with it said, a key to a tractor. A tractor key and a name. That was my inheritance. A punchline to a joke I didn't find funny. I looked at the key in my palm. It felt absurd, a relic from a life I had no connection to. What was I supposed to do with a tractor key? I didn't know how to drive a car, let alone a piece of farm equipment. I didn't know anything about the woman who had left it for me, except for the one fact that had defined my entire existence. She had let me go. I stuffed the key and the note into the pocket of my worn jeans, the cold metal pressing against my thigh. I took the manila envelope, slung my threadbare backpack over my shoulder, and walked out of the Northwood Group Home for Boys without looking back. The automatic door hissed shut behind me, and for the first time in my life, there was no one in the world who was required to know where I was. The freedom felt less like a gift and more like a crushing weight. I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the whole world was just empty air. The bus station was a symphony of desperation, people sleeping on benches, the air thick with the smell of exhaust fumes and stale coffee. I bought a one-way ticket to a town I'd never heard of, a place called Oakhaven. It was a stupid, impulsive decision, fueled by the $200 in my pocket and the utter lack of any other direction to go. What else was I going to do? Get a motel room and wait for the money to run out? The name on that paper, Eleanor Vance, was the only thread I had, no matter how frayed and rotten it seemed. Maybe I'd go there and spit on her doorstep. Maybe I'd go there and find nothing at all. Either way, it was a destination. It was a forward motion. The bus ride was long, hours of watching the gray, drizzling Oregon landscape slide past the window. I watched families get on and off, couples holding hands, students with headphones. Everyone seemed to be moving from one point of connection to another. I was just moving. I leaned my head against the cool glass, the vibration of the engine a constant thrum against my skull. I thought about the key, a tractor key. Why not a letter? Why not a photograph? Why not something that explained anything? A key is a promise of something locked away, or it's just a useless piece of metal. I didn't know which one this was, but the weight of it in my pocket was the only solid thing I had to hold on to. As the bus pulled into Oakhaven, the sun was beginning to set, painting the bruised purple clouds with streaks of orange and pink. The town wasn't much more than a wide spot in the road, a single main street with a handful of storefronts, a grocery store with a flickering neon sign, a diner, a post office, and a bar. The bus hissed to a stop in front of the diner, and the driver called out, "Oakhaven!" I was the only one who got off. The bus pulled away, its red taillight shrinking into the distance, leaving me in a profound and sudden silence. The air smelled different here. It smelled of damp earth, of pine needles, of wood smoke. It was clean and cold. I stood there for a long moment, my backpack feeling impossibly heavy. This was it, the end of the line. Now what? I walked into the diner. It was warm inside, a little greasy, smelling of coffee and fried onions. A few old men sat at the counter nursing mugs of coffee. A waitress with tired eyes and a kind smile looked up from wiping down the counter. "Can I help you, honey?" she asked. "I'm looking for someone," I said, my voice sounding rough. "Or a place, I guess. Eleanor Vance." The old men at the counter stopped talking. They turned and looked at me. The waitress's friendly expression tightened just a little. "Eleanor?" she said slowly. "No one's seen Eleanor in years. She passed away. Must be, 5-6 years ago now." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd known it was a possibility, of course. She would have been old, but I hadn't prepared for the finality of it. The door I had traveled all this way to either knock on or burn down was already gone. There was nothing. Just a dead end. "Oh," I said. It was all I could manage. My grand plan, my only plan, had just evaporated. One of the old men at the counter swiveled on his stool. He had a weathered face and hands stained with what looked like grease. "You family?" he asked, his eyes sharp and curious. "Her grandson," I mumbled, the words feeling foreign and untrue in my mouth. The man nodded slowly. "Vance, I see a little of her in your eyes. Stubborn eyes." He took a sip of his coffee. "Her place is still out there, end of Ridge Road. Been sitting empty ever since. Poor woman. She held on as long as she could." "Held on to what?" I asked. The man just shook his head. "The world, son. Just the world." The waitress drew me a crude map on a napkin. Ridge Road was about 3 miles out of town. There were no more buses, no taxis, just my own 2 feet. I thanked her, bought a bottle of water I couldn't really afford, and walked back out into the twilight. The sky was darkening quickly now, the last vestiges of color draining away, leaving a deep, starless indigo. The walk was cold, the road was unlit, and the tall pines on either side seemed to swallow up what little light was left. I was completely, utterly alone. Every rustle in the woods, every hoot of a distant owl seemed to amplify my solitude. I clutched the key in my pocket. The anger I'd been nursing for a decade had nowhere to go now. It was just a hollow ache in my chest. I had come all this way for a ghost. I was chasing a memory that wasn't even mine. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it. A rusted, leaning mailbox almost hidden by overgrown blackberry bushes. The name on the side was faded, barely legible, but I could make it out under the thin beam of my cheap keychain flashlight. E. Vance. This was it. A dirt driveway, more like two muddy ruts, disappeared into the darkness. I took a deep breath and turned onto the path, pushing through wet branches that slapped against my face. And then I saw the house. It was a silhouette against the night sky, a dark, hulking shape that seemed more like a wound in the landscape than a home. A sagging porch, a roof that dipped in the middle like a broken back. The windows were dark, vacant eyes. The place felt abandoned, forgotten, surrendered to the slow, relentless crush of nature. I walked up the creaking wooden steps of the porch, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what I was looking for. An answer, a reason, a place to sleep for the night. I tried the doorknob. Locked. Of course. I pulled out the key, the tractor key, and tried it in the lock, knowing it was useless. It didn't fit. It wasn't even the right shape. I slumped down onto the porch steps, the damp wood seeping through my jeans. I was exhausted. I was cold. I was 18 years old, and my entire inheritance consisted of a key that didn't open anything in a grave in a town I'd never known. I buried my face in my hands, and for the first time since I was a little kid, I cried. I cried for the mother I never knew, for the grandmother who gave me away, for the 10 years I'd lost in a system that didn't care if I lived or died. I cried because I was finally free, and I had absolutely no idea what to do with it. After a while, the tears stopped. The cold was getting deeper, sinking into my bones. I couldn't stay out here all night. I got up and started walking around the house, my flashlight beam cutting a weak path through the darkness. The windows were boarded up. The back door was as solid as the front. It was a fortress of neglect. Desperate, I made my way past the house toward another, even larger silhouette in the distance. A barn. Its huge doors were slightly ajar, held closed by a thick chain, but there was a gap just wide enough for me to squeeze through. I slipped inside. The air in the barn was thick with the smell of old hay, dust, and engine oil. It was vast and cavernous, filled with shadows. My flashlight beam danced across old tools hanging on the walls, stacks of rotting lumber, and in the center of it all, a massive, hulking shape covered by a heavy canvas tarp. It was the size of a small elephant. My heart gave a strange little jump. I walked over to it and pulled at the corner of the tarp. It was heavy, stiff with age, but I managed to lift it. And there it was, an old tractor. It was a beast, painted a faded green with huge, cracked rubber tires and a seat, worn smooth from years of use. It looked like something out of a history book. And on the side of the steering column, there was an ignition, a small, round hole. My hand was shaking as I pulled the key from my pocket. It felt like a dream. Reached out, the metal cold against my fingertips, and slid the key into the ignition. It fit. It turned. There was a low, grinding groan, a cough, a sputter, and then nothing. The engine was dead, the battery probably gone for a decade, but that wasn't the point. The key fit. It was real. This was my tractor, a useless, dead machine in a collapsing barn, but it was mine. A surge of something, not hope, not yet, but something like it, something like purpose, went through me. I started looking around the tractor, running my hands over the cool metal. On the side, near the driver's seat, was a small built-in toolbox, rusted shut. I found a crowbar nearby and wedged it under the lid. With a screech of tortured metal, it popped open. Inside, nestled on a bed of greasy rags, was a small tin box, and lying on top of it, another key. This one was smaller, a brass house key. My breath caught in my throat. I grabbed the key and the box and scrambled out of the barn, back to the house. I ran up the porch steps, my boots thudding on the wood. I slid the new key into the lock on the front door. It turned with a satisfying, solid click. The door swung inward on a long, low groan, opening into a darkness that felt 100 years old. I stepped across the threshold into my grandmother's house. I was in. The house was cold, colder than outside. The air was still and heavy with the scent of dust, decaying paper, and something faintly floral like dried lavender. My flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing a room frozen in time. Furniture was draped in white sheets, like sleeping ghosts. A grandfather clock stood silent in the corner, its hands stopped at 3:15. Dust motes danced in the beam of my light like tiny, frantic spirits. It was a tomb, but it was also the first place in 10 years that I had entered without being buzzed in, without having to sign a logbook. I walked slowly through the living room, into a small kitchen. A calendar on the wall was turned to August, 6 years ago, the last month of her life. I sat down at the dusty kitchen table and placed the tin box in front of me. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid. Inside there was no money, no jewelry, just a thick stack of envelopes tied together with a faded blue ribbon. They were addressed to me, Leo, my name in that same elegant, slightly shaky handwriting. I untied the ribbon, my fingers fumbling. The top envelope had a single word written on it: "Start here." I opened it. The paper inside was brittle and the ink was slightly faded. I began to read. "My dearest Leo," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone and you have come home. I imagine you are a man now, 18. It breaks my heart that I never got to see it. I want to say I'm sorry. I want to say it 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times, until the words lose all meaning and then find it again. But I know that sorry is a hollow word when you're the one who has lived a lifetime with the consequences of my actions. So instead of sorry, let me give you the truth." My hands were trembling so hard I could barely hold the paper steady. This was it, the answer to the question that had haunted my entire life. I didn't give you up because I didn't love you, Leo. I gave you up because I loved you more than my own life. Your mother, my beautiful, reckless daughter, got involved with some very dangerous people. She made mistakes, the kind of mistakes that don't wash away. When she died, those mistakes didn't die with her. They came looking for what they were owed, and when they couldn't get it from her, they decided they would take it from you. They were going to take you, my sweet boy. I couldn't let that happen. The system, for all its flaws, was the only place deep enough to hide you, the only place they wouldn't think to look. Putting you into foster care was the hardest thing I have ever done. It felt like cutting off a piece of my own soul. But every single day, I told myself it was to keep you safe. It was the only way. I had to stop reading. The room was spinning. All the years of anger, the carefully constructed narrative of being unwanted, of being abandoned, it all shattered in an instant. It wasn't abandonment. It was protection. A brutal, painful, last-ditch act of love. I leaned my head on the table, the old paper crinkling beneath my forehead, and a different kind of tears came. Not tears of loneliness, but tears of grief for a woman I had never known and a life we had both been robbed of. After a few minutes, I picked up the letter again. "This farm, this land, it's all I have to give you. It's not much, and I'm afraid it comes with a fight. The same people who threatened your mother, or at least the company they hide behind now, they want this land. They've wanted it for years. They've been trying to force me out, trying to bury me in taxes and legal fees. They think because I was an old woman, and now because you are a young man with nothing, that you will be easy to push aside. Do not let them. This land is your birthright, Leo. It's the last piece of us that's left. The tractor key was a test of faith. I hoped you'd be stubborn enough, smart enough, to not give up when the first door didn't open. You are my grandson, after all. Stubborn is in our blood. There is more you need to know, more I have to tell you. The other letters will explain everything, but for tonight, just know this. You were never, ever unwanted. You were loved so fiercely it nearly broke the world. Sleep in your home, Leo, for the first time. Your loving grandmother, Eleanor. I read the letter 3 more times, the words sinking into me, rewriting my past. I wasn't an orphan. I was a survivor. I wasn't abandoned. I was protected. I looked around the dark, silent house. It didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like a sanctuary. I found a bedroom upstairs. The bed was covered in a sheet, but under it were thick, handmade quilts. I pulled one off, wrapped it around myself, and lay down on the dusty mattress. I didn't have a pillow, so I used my backpack. For the first time in my life, I fell asleep in a room that was mine, under a roof that belonged to my family, with the truth of my grandmother's love wrapped around me like a shield. I slept a deep, dreamless sleep, the sleep of a boy who had finally, after a lifetime of wandering, found his way home. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through a grimy window. The world outside was green and alive. The drizzle had passed, leaving everything clean and glistening. For a moment, I forgot where I was, and the old panic of waking up in the group home started to rise in my chest. Then I remembered. The house, the letter, the key. It was all real. I sat up, the heavy quilt pooling around my waist. The house was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet, not the sterile, oppressive silence of an institution. It was the sound of a place at rest. I spent the morning exploring. I took the sheets off the furniture, letting the rooms breathe for the first time in years. The house was small but solid. A living room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with old but sturdy wooden cabinets, 2 bedrooms upstairs. It was filled with Eleanor's life. Bookshelves crammed with novels, their spines cracked and worn. A sewing basket filled with colorful thread. Framed photos on the mantelpiece, all of a pretty, smiling young woman with my eyes. My mother. There were no photos of me. A painful reminder of the life I'd never had here. In the kitchen, I found a stack of official-looking envelopes on the counter, right where she must have left them. They were from the county tax office and from a law firm representing someone called Viridian Development Corporation. The tax notices were all marked past due with angry red stamps. The letters from Viridian were polite but firm, offering to purchase the property for a price that seemed, at first glance, incredibly generous. They were offering to alleviate the financial burden of the back taxes. It sounded like a rescue. But after reading Eleanor's letter, I knew it was a trap. This was them. The people she had warned me about. They weren't just developers. They were vultures circling, waiting for her to fall, and now waiting for me to do the same. The total amount of back taxes was staggering. Thousands of dollars. More money than I had ever imagined. The $200 in my pocket felt like a joke. The generous offer from Viridian suddenly seemed like my only option. I could sell. I could take the money and walk away, start a new life somewhere else, free and clear. It would be the smart thing to do, the easy thing. But then I thought of her letter. This land is your birthright, Leo. Do not let them push you aside. I thought of her hiding me away, sacrificing her entire life with me, just to keep me safe, just to preserve this one piece of ground for me. Selling it would be like spitting on her grave. It would be proving them right, that I was just a kid with nothing, easily pushed aside. I sank into a kitchen chair, my head in my hands. The weight of it all came crashing down on me. I was 18 years old. I had no money, no skills, no one to help me. I was up against a corporation with an army of lawyers. The fight was impossible. It was hopeless. She had left me a home, but she had also left me a war. I had no idea how to win. The despair was a physical thing, a cold knot in my stomach. I felt that same sense of being on the edge of a cliff again, only this time I could see the rocks at the bottom. Listen, if you've made it this far in the story, maybe it's because you know what this feels like. Maybe you've been handed a situation that felt impossible, a debt you couldn't pay, a fight you couldn't win, a past you couldn't escape. You stand there and you have two choices. You can take the easy way out, the one that everyone tells you is the smart thing to do, or you can choose the harder path, the one that honors who you are or who you want to be. It's a moment that defines you. I think we all face a moment like that in our lives. If you have, I'd be honored if you'd share a little bit about it in the comments. Not for me, but for everyone else who might be reading and feeling alone in their own fight. Your story could be the thing that gives someone else the strength to take that harder path. This community is built on sharing those moments. Now, let's get back to the story and the choice I had to make sitting in that dusty, silent kitchen. I sat there for hours, the sun moving across the floor, the letters from Viridian feeling heavier and heavier in my hand. Part of me, the scared, institutionalized kid who had learned to expect nothing and trust no one, screamed at me to take the money. Run. Don't be a fool. You owe this ghost of a grandmother nothing. She's the one who put you in the system. But another part of me, a part I barely knew, existed. A stubborn, quiet voice that sounded a little like the old man in the diner, whispered back, "Stubborn is in our blood." I kept rereading her first letter. You were loved so fiercely it nearly broke the world. Could I really walk away from that? Could I let the people who had taken my mother and my childhood also take this last piece of my grandmother? The answer came to me not as a thought, but as a feeling. A slow, rising heat in my chest. It was anger, a clean, clarifying anger. They would not win. I didn't know how, but I was going to fight. I was going to stay. That decision, once made, was like a dam breaking. The fear and despair didn't disappear, but now they had a direction. They were fuel. The first thing I needed was information, the other letters. I went back to the tin box. There were nearly a dozen of them, each one numbered in sequence. I opened the second one. Leo, it read, if you've decided to stay, then you are truly my grandson, and I am so proud of you wherever I am. But you can't do this alone. There's a man in town, a lawyer named Arthur Davies. He was my friend. He knows the whole story, and he's been holding something for you. He's old and a little crusty, but he is the most honorable man I have ever known. His office is on Main Street, above the hardware store. Go to him. Tell him you are my grandson. Tell him you found the letters. He will know what to do. Trust him, Leo. He helped me for years. He will help you too. Arthur Davies. A name, a potential ally. It was the first real thread of hope I'd had. The letter went on to detail the early history of Viridian's attempts to buy the land, how they started with friendly offers that slowly turned into threats, how they tried to use legal loopholes to claim parts of her property. It was a chronicle of a long, lonely fight, one she had waged all by herself. Reading it made my resolve harden. This wasn't just my fight now, it was hers too. I was finishing what she started. I found an old phone book in a kitchen drawer, the pages yellow and soft. The listing was there. Davies, Arthur, attorney at law. The address was just as she'd said, above the hardware store. I had no phone in the house, of course, so I'd have to walk back into town. Before I left, I did something that felt important. I started to clean. I found a broom in a pantry and swept the thick layer of dust from the kitchen floor. I washed the windows, scrubbing away years of grime until the afternoon light poured in, bright and clear. I filled a bucket with water from the hand pump outside, the only running water on the property, and wiped down every surface I could reach. It was a small act, but it was a declaration. This wasn't an abandoned house anymore. It was my home, and I was going to take care of it. The walk back to town felt different this time. The world didn't seem so hostile. The trees weren't menacing shadows, they were just trees. The silence wasn't empty, it was peaceful. I had a purpose. I found the hardware store easily. A steep, narrow staircase on the side of the building led up to a door with frosted glass. A single line of black text read, "Arthur Davies, Attorney at Law." I took a deep breath and knocked. A gruff voice from inside yelled, "It's open!" I pushed the door open and stepped into an office that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. Towers of books and paper covered every surface. The air smelled of old paper, pipe tobacco, and coffee. Behind a massive wooden desk sat a man who looked as old as the office itself. He had a shock of white hair, thick glasses perched on the end of his nose, and a deeply lined face. He was scowling at a document. He didn't look up. "What do you want?" he grumbled. I'm looking for Mr. Davies," I said, my voice suddenly feeling very young. He finally looked up. His eyes, magnified by the glasses, were a piercing blue. He studied me for a long moment. "You found him. What's the trouble? Someone run over your dog?" "No, sir," I said, my hands sweating. "My name is Leo Vance. I'm Eleanor Vance's grandson." The scowl on his face vanished. It was replaced by a look of profound shock, and then something else, something softer. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Eleanor's boy," he said, his voice now quiet, losing its gruff edge. "My God, she always said you'd come back one day. I have to admit, after all these years, I'd started to doubt her." He stood up, a tall, stooped man, and walked around the desk. He looked me up and down. "You have her eyes, that same stubborn set to your jaw." He gestured to a worn leather chair in front of his desk. "Sit down, son. Sit down. Tell me everything." I sat and I told him. About the group home, about turning 18, about the key and the note. I told him about finding the tractor, the house key, and the first letters. I pulled the letters from Viridian out of my backpack and laid them on his desk. He listened patiently, nodding, his expression growing more serious with every word. When I was finished, he was silent for a long time. He picked up one of the letters from Viridian and stared at it with open contempt. "Viridian," he spat the name like it was poison. "Vultures. They hounded your grandmother for the last 10 years of her life. They thought they could scare an old woman off her land. They didn't know Eleanor." He looked back at me. She was the toughest woman I ever met, and the most devoted. Everything she did, every single day of her life, after she had to let you go, it was all for you, to keep this place safe for you. He then told me the full story. Viridian Development wasn't just a company, it was a front, a legitimate face for the same criminal enterprise that my mother had gotten entangled with. They had laundered their money into real estate, and their new goal was to acquire all the land along Ridge Road for a massive commercial development tied to a proposed highway expansion. They used intimidation, predatory loans, and legal harassment to force people out. Eleanor's farm was the key piece of the puzzle, the largest parcel of land. She had refused to sell again and again. She'd fought them in court, filed complaints, and made herself a thorn in their side for a decade. She knew that if they got the land, they would have won, and the sacrifice of giving me up would have been for nothing. "She knew she was dying," Mr. Davies said, his voice thick with emotion. "In the last year, she got her affairs in order. She left something with me. For you." He walked over to a large safe in the corner of the office, spun the combination lock, and pulled out a heavy, iron-strapped, wooden chest. He heaved it onto his desk with a loud thud. "This is yours. It's the rest of your inheritance." He gave me the key. I unlocked the chest. Inside, it was packed to the brim. On the top layer were more letters, dozens of them, all in her handwriting. Beneath them were journals, thick, leather-bound books filled with her writing. And beneath the journals, I saw something that made my breath catch. Stacks of cash, neatly bundled stacks of 20s, 50s, and hundreds. It wasn't a fortune, but it looked like more money than I had ever seen in my life. Eleanor was frugal, Mr. Davies explained. She saved every penny she ever made. From selling vegetables at the farmer's market, from mending clothes for people in town. She lived on almost nothing. She knew the first thing Viridian would do when you showed up was try to foreclose on the property for the back taxes. That money there, she saved it for you. It should be just enough to clear the debt and give you a little to live on while you get on your feet. I was speechless. I ran my fingers over the worn bills. This wasn't just money. It was years of sacrifice. It was every meal she skipped, every luxury she denied herself. It was her love made tangible. But that wasn't the most important thing in the chest. Mr. Davies pointed to the journals. The real weapon is in there, he said. Eleanor was meticulous. For 10 years she documented everything, every threat, every illegal action, every instance of harassment from Viridian. She has names, dates, and in some cases, recordings of conversations. She even tracked their corporate structure back to the same men who were responsible for your mother's troubles. It's a complete record of their corruption. She was building a case. She called it her insurance policy. I pulled out one of the journals. Her handwriting filled every page. It was a diary of her war. It was detailed, damning, and heartbreaking. It was the story of a grandmother fighting a dragon to protect a treasure she could never see. This was the real inheritance. Not the land, not the money, but the story, the truth, and the tools to finish her fight. I looked up at Mr. Davies, my eyes burning with unshed tears. "What do I do now?" I asked. He gave me a grim, determined smile. "Now," he said, "we fight back." The next few weeks were a blur of activity. I moved into the house permanently. With the money Eleanor had left, I paid the back taxes at the county office, the clerk's eyes going wide when I slapped the stack of cash down on the counter. The look of pure shock on her face was worth every penny. With the property officially and legally mine, the first major threat was neutralized. Viridian couldn't force a foreclosure. That victory, small as it was, felt monumental. It was the first time in my life I had ever won anything. I spent my days working on the farm and my nights reading my grandmother's journals. The work was hard. The house needed 1,000 repairs. I learned how to patch a roof from a book I found in the library. I learned how to fix the plumbing from watching videos on my phone, which I bought with some of the leftover money. I cleared the overgrown yard with a rusty scythe I found in the barn, my hands blistering and then callousing. Every day my body ached in new and interesting ways, but it was a good ache. It was the ache of building something, of reclaiming something. I got the old water pump working properly and even managed to get the electricity turned back on. The first time I flipped a switch and a light bulb flickered to life in the kitchen, I almost wept. The house was slowly coming back to life, and so was I. But the real work happened at night. Sitting at the kitchen table under that single bare bulb, I immersed myself in Eleanor's world. I read her journals, page by page. I listened to the tiny cassette tapes she had recorded, her voice calm and steady as she interviewed other farmers Viridian had threatened, their voices shaky with fear and anger. I pieced together the entire sordid history of the company's campaign of terror. It was all there. The evidence was overwhelming. It painted a picture not just of corporate greed, but of a deep, systemic corruption that had its roots in the criminal underworld. My mother hadn't just made a mistake. She'd been a victim, swallowed by a darkness that was now trying to swallow my home. Mr. Davies guided me through it all. I would walk into town twice a week and we would go over the journals, organizing the evidence, making copies, and building our case. He was more than a lawyer. He became my mentor, my teacher. He taught me about property law, about corporate loopholes, about how to stand up to bullies in suits. He also told me stories about my grandmother, painting a portrait of a woman who was fiercely intelligent, funny, and relentlessly stubborn. He told me how she used to bring him jars of her famous blackberry jam and then argue with him about legal strategy for an hour. Through his stories, she became real to me, more than just a name in a letter. I started to feel like I knew her. I started to understand the woman who had fought so hard for me. One evening, a sleek black car I didn't recognize pulled up my driveway. A man in an expensive suit got out. He was slick and polished, a stark contrast to the rustic world of the farm. He walked up to the porch where I was sitting, cleaning an old tool. "Leo Vance?" he asked, his smile not reaching his eyes. "That's me," I said, not getting up. "My name is Robert Peterson. I'm with Viridian Development," he said, extending a hand. I ignored it. His smile faltered for a second. "I'm here to follow up on our previous offers to purchase this property. We're prepared to make you a new offer, a very substantial one, enough to set you up for life, son. A new car, a nice apartment in the city, college, whatever you want." I looked at him, at his polished shoes and his $1,000 suit. I thought about my grandmother, saving her pennies, living on nothing, writing in her journals night after night. I thought about the fear in the voices of the other farmers on her tapes. "The farm's not for sale," I said, my voice quiet but firm. He chuckled, a condescending little sound. "Let's be realistic, kid. This place is a wreck. You're living in a dump. What are you going to do here? Become a farmer? You don't know the first thing about it. We're offering you a golden ticket out of this life. Take it. It's the smart play." "I'm not interested in the smart play," I said, looking him directly in the eye. "I'm interested in staying right where I am." His friendly facade dropped completely. His face hardened. "You're making a big mistake. This property is going to be ours, one way or another. You can't stop progress. An orphan with a half-rotten farm is not going to stand in the way of a multi-million-dollar development project. We can make your life very, very difficult." It was a threat, plain and simple. The same kind of threat they had used on my grandmother. But he didn't know what I knew. He didn't know about the journals, the tapes, the evidence. He still thought I was just some dumb kid he could scare off. "I think you're the one who's making a mistake," I said, my voice steady. "You should probably talk to your bosses. Tell them that Eleanor Vance's grandson has her journals, all of them, and he has a very good lawyer. Now get off my property." The color drained from his face. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He had no idea what to say. He just turned, walked stiffly back to his shiny car, and drove away, kicking up a cloud of dust. I watched him go, my heart hammering in my chest. I had done it. I had stood up to them. I hadn't flinched. And in that moment, I felt my grandmother's presence so strongly, it was as if she were standing right there beside me, a proud hand on my shoulder. The war wasn't over, but I had just won a major battle. The aftermath of that confrontation was silence. Viridian went quiet. Their letters stopped. Their cars stopped driving slowly past my driveway. It was an unnerving quiet. Mr. Davies and I knew they were regrouping, trying to figure out how much we really knew and what we planned to do with it. We used that time to prepare. We compiled the strongest evidence into a formal complaint, ready to be filed with the state attorney general. We were no longer on the defensive. We were ready to attack. During this time, something else began to happen. The community of Oakhaven, which had initially been wary of me, started to open up. The old man from the diner, whose name was Hank, showed up one day with a toolbox and helped me fix the barn door. The waitress, Sarah, started dropping off hot meals for me, saying she didn't want me to starve. People who had known and respected Eleanor saw that I was staying, that I was fighting, and they started to rally around me. They shared their own stories of Viridian's tactics, adding their voices to my grandmother's evidence. I learned that I wasn't alone in this fight. The entire town had been living under the shadow of this predatory company for years. I had just been the one to finally turn on a light. I was no longer just fighting for my farm. I was fighting for Oakhaven. The final confrontation didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in Mr. Davies' dusty office. Viridian's lawyers requested a meeting. They wanted to negotiate. Two of them showed up, looking just as slick and expensive as the man who had visited my farm. They sat across the desk from me and Mr. Davies. They started with a new, even bigger offer. They were willing to pay me a fortune to buy the farm and the journals. They wanted to buy my silence. Mr. Davies let them talk. When they were finished, he slid a single piece of paper across the desk. It was a legally binding agreement. "Here is our counteroffer," he said, his voice like gravel. "You will withdraw all interest in the Vance property permanently. You will also create a restitution fund for the other families in this town that you have harassed and defrauded over the past decade. The amount is non-negotiable." He pointed to a figure that made both lawyers' eyes bulge. "In exchange for that, we will agree not to release the contents of Eleanor Vance's journals to the state prosecutor or the press. You have 24 hours to sign. If you don't, the story of your company's criminal origins and predatory practices will be on the front page of every newspaper in the state by the end of the week." It was a checkmate, and they knew it. We had them. Their entire legitimate enterprise was built on a foundation of criminality that my grandmother had painstakingly exposed. Releasing that information wouldn't just kill their development project, it would destroy their entire company. They tried to bluff, to threaten, but their hearts weren't in it. They were beaten. The next day, a courier delivered the signed agreement. It was over. We had won. A year has passed since that day. The restitution fund has helped several local families get back on their feet. Viridian Development has pulled out of Oakhaven completely. The shadow has lifted. My life is quiet now. It's filled with the rhythm of the seasons. I've learned how to fix fences, how to plant a garden, how to listen to the land. With Hank's help, I even got the old tractor running. The first time the engine roared to life, its deep, rumbling sound echoing across the fields, I felt a joy so pure it was almost overwhelming. I drove it out into the high field, the same field my grandmother must have worked 1,000 times, and I just sat there, watching the sun set over the hills. The house is no longer a wreck. It's a home. It's filled with light and warmth and the smell of baking bread, a skill Sarah taught me. I've framed some of the pictures of my mother and hung them on the wall. I even found a single faded photograph of my grandmother, a young woman with a fierce, joyful smile, and I put it on the mantelpiece, right next to her daughter. My inheritance wasn't the land, or the money, or even the house. It was a lesson. It was the understanding that home isn't just a place you are given. It's a place you fight for, a place you build, a place you earn. It's the strength and the love that are passed down, not in a will, but in the choices people make to protect the ones they love. My grandmother gave me more than a farm. She gave me back my story. She gave me a name I am proud to carry. She gave me a second chance. And that's what this is all really about, isn't it? Second chances. The world can be a hard place. It can knock you down and make you feel like you have nothing, like you are nothing. But I want to tell you from the bottom of my heart that you are not defined by where you start. You are defined by the choices you make when you're standing at a crossroads. You are defined by the fights you choose. by the love you honor, by the home you decide to build, whether it's made of wood and nails or just the community you gather around you. If this story meant anything to you, if you've ever felt lost and then found your way, I hope you'll subscribe and become a part of this community. Share your story in the comments below, because every story of resilience, every story of finding home is a light in the darkness. Thank you for listening, and remember, no matter how little you think you have, sometimes all you need is one key and the courage to find the right door.